Talk a little bit today about my career. I'm going to talk about what I'm doing now, and then I will finish by giving you a little bit of like an overview, a bit of general advice for people who are going to go into like creative industry like visual effects, and a lot of this information could probably apply to other similar like industries. So I'll start by giving you my titles. Here's a picture of me, just in case for some reason I'm too far away for you to see. I'm actually wearing the exact same shirt today, and I've not ironed it in either picture, so please don't judge me too much on this. So, titles. I'm a senior visual effects modeler. I'm an indie game developer. This is a Game of Thrones reference, just because it's relevant. I'm trying to stay up to date with pop culture. Why did I get into visual effects? I've kind of always loved storytelling in a kind of visual medium, and I've sort of been obsessed with 3D images since early films like Toy Story and so on. There was a show called Beast Wars. I don't know if anyone here is old enough to remember Beast Wars. It's like an old Transformers spin-off. It looks like this. Which was an inspiration for me, and so I was setting the bar really low, basically. I actually ended up sitting next to someone who worked on Beast Wars in my first ever job, who was about 20 years older than me, and he was a real conspiracy nut. He was obsessed with the idea of airplanes dropping chemtrails on us. He was a genuine flat earther, and I don't know what the moral of this is, just never meet your heroes, I guess. So I'm going to start by playing my visual effects show reel. I updated this earlier this year because that's easier than trying to explain it. So I'm usually either sculpting or modeling props, vehicles, characters, environments, whatever, and then giving that on to other departments to do the texturing, animation, rigging, lighting, and so on. So this is usually the finished project. When I'm done with it, it's just like a grey sculpture, and lots of people's hard work went into making what you're actually seeing in the final shot here. So I'm going to begin with a kind of general overview of my career from start to finish. Well, I say finish, I mean to present. Hopefully it's not over. In 2009, I graduated from this very establishment. University is sort of a base requirement for getting into the industry rather than any guarantee of getting a job whatsoever. So you will find that you still need to put a lot of work into putting a demo reel together after you graduate uni. Which brings me to the second year after graduating, where I was bartending and doing a little bit of freelance every now and then. It was quite a stressful year because my parents were really on my back to get out of the house. They were like, go out, get a real job, but I wanted to like sit in my room, work on my demo reel, and it is time well spent. Eventually, I kind of gave up on going straight into work as a modeler, and I started to look for work as a runner. And I eventually got hired as a runner at Framestore. So running is basically making tea and coffee for people and sitting on reception. But the best part about running is that it gives you a foot in the door to go and annoy everyone with your showreel. So my strategy was to find the emails of everyone important in the company and then find where they were sitting using the computer database and then go up to them and like really introduce myself. They probably hated it, but it worked because I was only a runner for 3 months, which is quite unheard of by modern standards. I hear a lot of people spending like a year or more in running and then maybe moving on to a sort of role like rotoscoping before they even get into what they're aiming for. So I wouldn't really use my route into the industry as a general example of the way to do it. I think whatever works for you. There's no correct way to do it, so just keep throwing stuff at the wall and trying, and eventually you will make it. You know, work on your demo reel, send it to people, and be kind of aggressive in trying to get your role. So I worked at Framestore for 5 years. It was a really good company to work for. I had pretty stable employment because work in visual effects is very dependent on how many movies they've got going on at one time. And so if there's a lull, then sometimes they'll let go of a lot of people. And then if there's lots going on, they'll hire lots of people. So it does tend to come and go in waves. But I managed to hang on and make my way from junior to like a mid-level modeler while I was there. And I eventually finished with Bagheera that I was doing at Framestore, which was, I'd been pushing to get towards character and creature modeling for some time. So I was super happy when I finally got to work on that. Although the film didn't come out for 3 years after I'd made it, because the Disney Jungle Book came out beforehand. And they were worried that 2 Jungle Book movies at the same time was too much for audiences. And they were probably right. And then just before Mowgli came out, Netflix brought it, so it got delayed even further. But now everyone can watch it on Netflix for free. It's okay. It's an all right movie, but Bagheera's great. So after I finished at Framestore, I went to go and work at Industrial Light and Magic. A lot of my reasons for switching companies, I kind of felt like I was getting too comfortable at Framestore, and also I wanted to get more money. And sometimes switching companies is a great way to increase your pay because you can lie about how much you were earning before. You know? So Industrial Light and Magic are well known for Star Wars, but I wasn't making Star Wars when I was there. I actually asked to be working on Ready Player One because I was a huge fan of the book. And while I was there, I got to try virtual reality for the first time. Industrial Light and Magic were making a kind of Star Wars experience where you have to reflect stormtrooper bolts with a lightsaber. And in a way, they sort of engineered my plans to leave VFX because I fell in love with VR so much I wanted to try and make it myself. So in my spare time while I was working at ILM, I was also teaching myself how to use Unity and do a bit of coding on the side, which is not natural to me. I tend to like fall more on the art side of things and then get very, very scared when there's too much like coding or like syntax involved. But it was a fun thing. I've always been a big video gamer as well, so you know, why not? Do what you enjoy. I needed to get a plan though, because you can't just make a video game, you need to have time to make one. So I decided to get a job at Weta Digital, A lot of these jobs I'd gotten without too much difficulty, because when I was at Framestore for 5 years, I got to know lots of people and make lots of friends, and the visual effects industry ends up being quite small, and they tend to trade employees between all of the different countries all over the world. So when I was trying to get my job at Industrial Light and Magic and Weta Digital, a lot of the reason I was able to get interviews really easily was just because I was already friends with the bosses who were working there. Community is really, really important. I mean, I like the idea of it being very like a meritocracy where anyone's got an equal opportunity to get the job, but realistically, it helps a hell of a lot if you know people. Weta Digital are known for working their employees really, really hard, very long hours. You completely lose your social life when you're working for them, but they just throw like tons and tons of money at you. So my plan was to go and work there for a year, save up, and then move somewhere cheap in Europe, not London, because I can't afford to live here. I'm in Berlin now. And then make my game whilst living off those savings. So that brings me to where I am now, which is making Sentenced. Is that the next slide? Yeah. So I'm making a game which is probably not going to make a lot of money, but I think is a really exciting idea. I'm making a virtual reality game that puts the player in the role of medieval executioner in order to explore the role between obedience to authority and personal conscience. So I want to give the player orders they feel morally uncomfortable carrying out in order to see how far people are willing to go before they feel like they've had enough and they're going to try and rebel against those giving them orders. I wanted to make this, I had the idea to do this because of VR. You feel when you're playing a virtual reality game and the characters are kind of like lifelike and standing next to you and making eye contact with you, it does feel much more like they're a real person. And so doing a violent act in VR feels totally different to pressing a button in a normal video game. And so I wanted to use this sort of leverage, this extra emotional connection to try and reevaluate how we think about violence in video games and player agency. It's also very inspired by social experiments by Stanley Milgram in the 1960s. I won't go into them, but he was the like electroshock guy. I'm going to play a little work in progress trailer for the game. It's still, work is ongoing, but I'm hoping to release it early next year. Oh no, I skipped the slide. Let's go back and press play this time. There we go. So here's a few like work in progress screenshots. I've been doing all the animation by motion capturing myself in my living room using the Vive, which was quite a pain in the ass to set up, but I can't afford to hire an animator, so this is a nice workaround. I've basically been having the time of my life working on this game. It's so rare after you get into the professional world to be able to make the time just to do something that you care about. Any opportunity you get to like do the thing that you love doing should be like grasped. For the sort of Act 3 of this presentation, I wanted to just give you some sort of general advice that might be helpful to people going into visual effects. And this is more on the kind of business side of things, because generally there's a lot of glamour around the film industry, and people tend to forget that it is like a job, and jobs can be hard, right? So I'm going to go in with the good first, because that's the best place to begin. So it can feel like the coolest job in the world when you are like spending weeks and weeks sculpting facial expressions for a panther, or working on source material that you really loved. Like the Dracula film didn't turn out to be amazing, but I love Dracula so much. Like this gothic fiction really does it for me. I was just happy to be like working on it and seeing all the concept art and working on the story and so on. It does feel like really fun. And you get paid to make art, which is not to be underestimated, because there is the starving artist stereotype for a reason. It can be quite hard to turn that like creative willpower into something that is also financially viable, and this has kind of worked out okay for me, so whoopee. And community, I've made pretty much like all of my best friends through this industry. It's full of cool, creative nerds. I mean, that's all you need. So the bad is that it can be difficult and stressful. This is a industry where the VFX houses are currently, underbidding themselves to try and do the work for the clients as cheaply and as quickly as possible, because the big companies like Warner Brothers and Disney and so on, they want to get the work done quickly, and there's a lot of competition within visual effects. So you end up trying to do the work faster and faster and faster and faster, and this often leads to a lot of pressure, especially when deadlines are approaching on the artists, and it can be quite stressful at that point, which is important to remember. And the job is hard. The technology changes so often that you need to be staying on top of developments all the time. The way that I modeled when I started in the industry is completely different to the way that I model now, just because of a few software updates, a few new technologies, and you can never like rest on your laurels in the industry, or you become a dinosaur very, very quickly. You need to keep learning all the time. It never ends. But that can actually be a good thing as well, because it keeps things fresh and it keeps you alive. But it does have its dull moments. I once spent an entire month placing pipes on a wall for the background of a shot, and it's really difficult to like think of different ways of laying out pipes so that the pipes don't look like they've repeated each other, and you can go a little bit crazy doing things like this. So it's good to keep in mind that whilst you will be doing panthers sometimes you might be just doing something that is less fun. The ugly, I'm going to go with no workers' unions, which means that you are responsible for your own welfare in the industry. This means that you have to negotiate your own pay, you have to negotiate your working hours, and you have to make sure that you are not overworking yourselves and that you are giving yourself time to rest. But I'll go into more on that in a minute. I guess I'm an ancient now. I'm only 30, but I feel that way. So my first bit of advice is to talk about pay. It's a bit of a taboo subject, especially in countries like England, because people feel a bit shy, a bit embarrassed about talking how much they're earning. But the best way to ensure that you are getting paid fairly is to talk to your peers and just find out what they're earning. And then if there's like a difference, or you feel like you are being unfairly treated, then you can go and have a meeting with your bosses and hopefully figure something out. Let me just go to the right page. It's all about transparency, really, and don't feel afraid to sort of stand up for yourself. I see a lot of people who are new in the industry who feel so lucky to have finally gotten a job in the industry. They tend to feel a little bit shy about asking for more. It's almost as if they should be so lucky that they have a lot. They kind of let themselves Not all companies do this, but definitely some companies take advantage of that a little bit. So just in the name of transparency, I thought I'd tell you how much I was earning at various points in my career. This is probably not to be used as a very static reference because it changes all the time. But when I was a runner, I was earning $17,000 a year, which is not very much to live on if you're living in London. I was like making myself poor, like with my rent and food on top of this, but that was only for a few months. And when I was a junior, I was earning $23,000, which was a bit of an increase. It's okay. But every year, I kept asking for more and more, and I was getting pay rises of about $5,000 to $8,000 every year that I was at Framestore. So by the time I was finished, I was getting up to a more like a better wage. I was on about $40,000 by the time I finished at Framestore. When I went to ILM, they asked me how much I'd been earning in my previous job, and I told them $50,000. So they were like, okay, well, we'll give you a little bit of an increase over your previous pay. We'll give you $54,000. And I was like, okay. So I was on that when I was at ILM, and then after that I went to Weta. And as I said, Weta is known for crazy money, but this is also a lot more because I was working an extra 10 hours at least every week. The average work day is usually it's about 9 till 6 when you're in VFX in London, which is like 9 hours roughly. And at Weta it was 10 hours standard, but there's a lot of overtime. So most of the time we were working 60-hour weeks. And so you can either, you know, be working 11 hours a day every day, or come in and like sacrifice your Saturday every week. But when I was there, I was earning £83,000 a year, which set me up, but it was hard. And I got quite depressed when I was working at Weta because I was too tired to like put any energy into exercising or cooking myself. I would finish work and just veg out on the couch like this every day. So while it enabled me to do what I'm doing now with my game, and I'm super grateful for that, I don't think it's a very sustainable way to live for a long period of time either. But some people do it. I think I'm fundamentally lazy. So for me, that's unacceptable. But this brings me on to my next point, which is don't become a victim of crunch culture. So this kind of attitude in the industry that when you're approaching a deadline, you need to put every like ounce of your soul into finishing this project off. And this can lead to some like unhealthy attitudes where people feel sort of like honor bound to continue working past their like limits, and people get burnt out and overtired, and no one will tell you to stop working, you know, because the more you work for the company, then they're not going to be like, some companies do tell you to go home, but a lot of them will let you work late into the evenings for nothing. So you need to set your own limits and make sure that you are going home on time and getting plenty of rest. A lot of studies recently have shown that humans are most productive and healthy when they're working 35 hours a week. And your work will be better if you get plenty of sleep. You'll get more work done to a better quality in a shorter period of time. So try not to fall into the trap of doing lots of overtime. But yeah, it can be difficult to resist, but that's my advice. Remember, the movies are fun and making them should be too. You might find that sometimes when you're working in the industry, you're drowning in like non-disclosure agreements, so you can't talk about what you're doing because you're worried if you say the name Luke Skywalker, Disney lawyers are going to fly in through the window and arrest you. And because there is a lot of money in this industry, it kind of leads to people taking things very, very seriously. But I think it's a fun job, and you need to remember that what you're doing is kind of inherently silly. You're making films about superheroes. And when things do get heavy, try and remember that this is for fun, you know? Business tends to forget that things are fun. Build your community and be sociable. I've already kind of touched on how important this is in that my last two jobs I basically got because I knew people. You guys are really lucky because you're already making a great community at university, and you should hold on to those contacts because having allies is very, very important, and you never know when someone will have a bit of work that they need some help on, and they'll call you up and you'll be able to get work that way. Yeah, being sociable is half of the job, really. Like, knowing your skills is one thing, and then being a good person and a sociable person is what will actually get you hired and keep you in jobs. Keep your ego in check. This is the counterbalance to my last point. I do know a few people who won't respond to criticism at all. You know, if your supervisor is telling you that something's not quite right with your job, don't tell him he's wrong and storm out of the room. Take the advice on board, because if you are completely rigid, then you won't last for very long. Making movies, especially in these very big companies, is an act of teamwork. And so there's no room for the lone ego. You're all working together to try and make this massive project. So be reasonable. Practice. This one speaks for itself. Just, if you want to get good at something, just do it and don't stop. When I started in the industry, I didn't know how to do digital sculpting at all. I didn't even know how to use Maya when I started modeling in the industry, and I just picked it up on job and was sculpting every day in my lunchtime until I, talking to people and getting criticism until I became kind of good at it. So don't give up on something because you think you're bad at it. As Jake the dog from Adventure Time says, the first step to being good at sucking at something is the first step to being kind of good at something. Everybody is terrified. Nobody knows what they're doing. This is important to remember. All of your bosses, their bosses, your peers, the artists that you really admire on Instagram, everyone is making it up as they go along and desperately trying to present their best face to the world. Okay? Inside, everybody is a mess, and they're all secretly hoping that they don't fuck up at any minute. Okay? So if you're feeling the pressure, don't worry. Everybody is in the same boat, and we're all making the rules up as we go along. And finally, remember that you are valuable. You guys are the future of the industry, so treat yourself well, look after those around you, and together everyone can make the industry a better place. So that's me. So does anyone have any questions? Do we have time for questions?
About 10 minutes.
Okay.
Where's the mic?
Yep, one at the back.
Okay. So generally speaking, how many models for the films are made for the first time for the actual film, and how many are outsourced? Because I've seen online talks that says modelers are not underappreciated, but I don't know how to say. There's standard models you can just get. You're not gonna model for the first time a chair, for example.
Okay, so one thing that's interesting here is that if you're making a model for a movie that is owned by, say, Disney, or whoever's producing it, then technically Disney kind of owns that model. And if it's a very obviously, that if it's obviously a unique model, then the idea is that you would remodel something completely new because that model is the property of whoever paid you to make it, right? So you can't just freely reuse all these different models because they have different rights associated with them. But some stuff is so generic, if it's in the background, then it doesn't really matter. And a lot of modeling departments keep a library of models that they can take bits and pieces on. One thing that's becoming more common nowadays in some companies like ILM and MPC is that they're outsourcing some of the simpler models to companies who are working in Bangalore or Singapore, and so that is having an effect on the amount of modelers who are hired on this side of things. But I find most of the time you end up building stuff from scratch every time, because even if a model was made for a completely different show, it might have been made 5 years ago and it doesn't work properly with the current renderer, or the UVs need to be a better resolution. So yeah, most of the time you just make stuff from scratch. It's very wasteful, but yeah, keeps me paid. Does that answer the question okay? Cool. Any others?
The question is, when you're working for the company, are you able to work on your own projects inside the company? Do they allow you to?
No, one of the reasons for this is that most companies these days work on a closed system. The big companies are very, very paranoid about stuff leaking out to the public. So very few, like you won't be able to like plug a USB stick in and like get work off. Everything's blocked. So you could probably work on your own stuff, but you're never going to get it off that computer, you know. So it didn't always used to be like that. When I first started in the industry, I used to do personal work at lunchtimes, but you just can't do that anymore. In the last few years, security measures have tightened a lot. I won't go into it, but yeah, it can be quite scary. But yeah, you can't do personal work unless you bring in your own laptop.
Do you mind if I follow up?
No, of course, go.
So would the company allow you to use their license at home? Or did you have to
No.
do that?
No, nice try.
I find your presentation very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
You've been in a lot of different areas of this creative business. You started with motion graphics, we started together.
Yeah.
Then you went to VFX, then VR and gaming.
Mm-hmm.
Which one you think is the one that, I'm not asking because you are working VR right now, but if you try to step back a little bit and see which one is more fun for you, which one represents you the most, which work represents you the most, which one would this be?
I have a good answer to this one in that there is no one, and what I enjoy is doing different things. I was doing modelling just straight for 5 years, and I was really wanting to try something different because when you do something new, you're challenged again, you're working in a different way, it changes the way you think. I'm just the kind of person who likes to be changing constantly, and so for me, the joy of doing something like I'm doing now with this VR game is that I get to work on everything. So if I'm not feeling particularly creative visually, I can work on some scripting that day, or if I am like really sleepy or I just want to listen to some music or a podcast, then I'll just sculpt something. So for me, it's not about like finding that one thing that I enjoy the most. I like doing everything. I'm very much a generalist at heart, I think. Yeah.
Alright, and if you had to decide between mindset and skill set, let's say you had your own company, you would hire someone, or you are somewhere director, you want to hire some new people, which one you would go for, mindset or skill set?
It has to be an even balance of both. Like, I can't choose one or the other. You have to be good at both of them, I think. You have to have the skills and be a good person. Yeah.
It's like a personal question. It's more about how you balance life, because I know you said you're a journalist and that you like to do a lot of things. I think personally my biggest problem is that I love everything, and it seems almost like a curse that you have one life, and I want to master everything.
Yeah.
And some of the things aren't even related to what I want to do career-wise. So do you find that you have time, if you have, maybe not hobbies, but other interests that you want to pursue, or do you feel that your life and career are almost like one and the same?
No, I think it's very important to have time to do hobbies. The problem with doing what you love for work is that you add the pressure that you have to make money doing it on top of doing what you love. And that can become pressured. And if you're not careful, you can almost end up hating what you were doing because you're desperately trying to turn it into a living. For me, I think the ideal balance is to just do work and then make sure that you leave plenty of time to do stuff that is in no way going to add to your career. Just do it because you like it. And don't feel guilty for doing that is another big thing, because sometimes you can be like, oh, there's no real point in doing this. It's not going to like help progress my life. But it will help your mind. You know, it's kind of like a mindfulness thing. If you're like focused on one goal, then it becomes pressured. But if you spread yourself out and do what you like, then you'll find that you're able to bring your like best self to each task instead of burning out on it, I guess. If that makes sense.